progeny, perspective, and the pursuit of the collective. Jingle incoming as we add to our team. Thank you for your patience as we take our first baby steps here. I'm Aliya, your host, and this is Connective Collective, where guests come from all backgrounds and all levels of knowledge in family history, and we discover together. Before we meet, they send me one of their ancestors for me to do a deep dive on. I prepare a presentation, then we meet and go over the information in the hopes that it is the impetus they needed to get over the hump wherever they're at in their family history journey. Research done for these episodes is only done with free resources so that you can be empowered to start or re-pick up your journey as well. This podcast is for anyone, anywhere. We discover the good, the bad, but always the beauty. This is episode 5. 10-4 disregard. That's how episodes typically go, but this is a special episode.
She is so not a rapper.
Apologies for the delay on this podcast episode. I've been very ill this week. You can kind of still hear it, I'm sure, in my voice. As I'm listening back to my audio, I'm like, wow, some of these voice recordings really don't sound like me, but they've been recorded over the last several days. So there's different levels in my sickness, I guess, that you can hear, or at least I can hear throughout the recording. So apologies for the inconsistencies in sound, for quality, and as well in literally the quality of myself. On top of being sick, the nation has faced much loss this week, and it was just a little overwhelming to feel the need to produce an episode the day so much happened, because it was Wednesday. Wednesday is my day that I release episodes. A little moment of silence for those who have lost their lives this week, as well as in remembrance of 9/11 this week, since this episode is coming out instead on the 12th. We're just going to do a little moment of silence for anyone you want to think of who has lost their lives. We appreciate you, we appreciate your support, and we love the dead. Not to make it weird, but, death makes people weird. To quote grown-ups,
who's ready to get their funeral on? I'm sorry, death makes me weird.
Well, I don't make jokes at funerals because it's disrespectful. But if that's part of your healing process, I'm cool with it.
Welcome to episode 5, but the first off-the-rip episode. Off-the-rip episodes will be actual times that people have used records to find graves. This is a little bit of a follow-up from the previous episode with my husband, DeAndre. So that was episode 4, if you've been following along. You don't have to watch that episode in order to enjoy this one, but, go watch the other episodes. Why not? The homework that I gave DeAndre was to visit the local museum from the town that his father currently lives in, his grandfather still currently lives in, and they were raised in, and some generations passed away in. So they have a Cleveland Historical Museum. Highly encourage anyone in the area to go check that out. Just like Connective Collective, the museum is a Connective Collective as well. They benefit from other people coming through and identifying their own ancestors, their own grandparents, aunts, whoever, in photos and donations of yearbooks as well, because it's information that can only be given from the primary sources, really. They do have a pretty good collection of yearbooks. They are missing pretty much all of the 90s, and then there's a couple early 2000s yearbooks. The 90s were missing, so we couldn't sneak any good peeks into his dad's high school time. We were able to find a lot on his grandpa, his grandma, and their siblings as well. This is just a little shout out for the Cleveland Historical Museum. If you have something that has just been sitting around and you don't even know if it's worth anything, I would suggest taking it by them, because it might be valuable history that someone like me would really appreciate having access to. And if you're genuinely not using it, it would be very, very appreciated. I know that they're missing lots of yearbooks, and they're missing especially yearbooks from when the high schools were segregated. And for someone who is looking into family history specifically during that time, it is something that the collective would really, really appreciate. I know that there's worry that, things won't be taken care of. I can promise you that they've done a really good job, and they would be so honored to take on any of that old documentation or anything that you have. Especially, there are so many people whose homes have burned down in the area that did house records, or you just never know what's going to happen. And they are able to document it, photograph it, and have it there in person for people to thumb through if they need that information. If you have family history that is specific to a location, go see if there's a historical society or a museum. I mean, this is a small town, and they have this cute little museum with lots of great stuff. You never know what you might be able to find in there. From my understanding, so this is Cleveland, Texas. From my understanding, we live in Huntsville, Texas. Not Huntsville, Alabama, Huntsville, Texas, which is home to Sam Houston State University, which is where my husband DeAndre currently attends school. Huntsville was, and honestly still is, the largest quote-unquote city for the farmers and all of those who live very rurally. That's very hard to say that 10 times fast. From what I understand, again, anyone, please at any time correct me, Cleveland was the closest major city for anyone who was a part of the lumber company towns. They both, even now, are still very, very small towns. Because we were going to be going, and Cleveland is about 55 minutes without traffic from where my husband and I are currently living. So we were like, let's take advantage of this opportunity. And so the night before, I plotted out where some of his ancestors may be buried and sent those all those locations to my husband, so that while we were already down there for the Cleveland Historical Museum, we could also pop by those grave sites and hopefully locate those headstones, because online some of the headstones had photos posted of them. There are sites that I'll talk about later on, like Billion Graves and findagrave.com, where people can upload pictures of graves that they've visited, and then people who maybe don't live in that area are able to then see that headstone for themselves without traveling all the way there. So there were some headstones that I knew kind of what to look for, because there were not great photos uploaded, but photos nonetheless. But then there were other headstones that had not been taken photos of, and we were just hoping that we'd be able to locate them. I'm going to talk about the types of documents you can use to find graves. And this is an interesting case in itself, because the deaths are so recent in terms of people who remember these people are still alive. People who attended these funerals are still alive. There's going to be different sources available versus when you're looking for someone who may have passed in the 1700s. And I will do another episode later on where I was able to use sources like these to locate those graves that I had wanted to find for people who passed away hundreds of years ago. This is a more recent line that I am trekking down with my husband. So some sources that you can use would be, of course, death certificates. There's official death certificates. There's also sometimes hospital records or burial records, funeral home records, anything to do with the death, the official documents surrounding a death. There's Find a Grave Index, like I was saying before, where when you go visit a grave, you can upload it to Find a Grave, and then anyone from all over the world can see it. And you can also request graves through there. Billion Graves also does this, and I enjoy using Billion Graves myself. It's just an app, and I don't have as much experience with Find a Grave Index besides finding graves on Find a Grave and connecting them to my family tree. But actually finding in-person graves, I've used Billion Graves a lot. Especially when I lived in the UK, I would just every weekend go fulfill requests on people who were looking for their ancestors' graves. For example, I would get a request saying they have a record saying their ancestors should be buried in section T. This is the date they died, and they're hoping for a photo of this headstone. And maybe this ancestor died 250 years ago. The family has long immigrated to America, and they are hoping someone in the area is gonna take some free time to go wander around massive graves in the UK. Usually they're huge graves, and find these headstones. And I found so much joy doing that. That was my Sunday evening activity usually as the sun set. Just went out and did that and gave them, I would take a little kit with me and do some gardening around it, if you will. Not really, just some cleanup just so that things didn't overgrow too badly. Generally, gardening is done in any graveyard, mowing at least, but individual care to a headstone is not done. So I would take old toothbrushes or some rags and just kind of give them a little scrub down so that the lettering was more easy to see, or maybe I would take an old fork and just kind of dig around on the sides so that weeds didn't get too noxious around them, that sort of a vibe. So Billion Graves and Find a Grave Index. You can request pictures of headstones from both of these locations. They're great tools. I will say in the US, a lot of larger graves have been fully photographed, which is awesome, but they haven't necessarily been transcribed. They haven't been indexed and uploaded fully. So if you're ever just bored and kind of want to, it's almost like gamified genealogy, but it's not your personal genealogy. It's just service that you can do to assist others who would like to find their ancestors. And you can go through these apps and type in the names, and that way those headstones can be added to people's profiles and their family members can find them all over the world. So that's one way. Another way is through the Social Security Death Index, and those will be records that just populate once someone has passed away. Social Security Death Index is specific to the United States. Another source to use would be proximity and area history. So when I say that, I mean, if you know, so what happened specifically with this case is over and over again, I saw on records that because these people had died pre the civil rights movement being fully established and desegregation happening, a lot of these graves kept saying Cleveland Colored Cemetery. And so obviously that is not going to be called the Cleveland Colored Cemetery anymore because lots of things have been renamed, whether it be named after slave owners or Confederate soldiers or all sorts of things. Things may have been around for 100+ years, but have been renamed multiple times since. I was able to find, and this was easy because it was so recent, unfortunately. This really put into perspective how recent civil rights were. And I know that my grandma remembers it and stuff, but my grandma's kicking. She's doing great, but she's in her 80s. And it really just is so similar, especially people who lived through going through a barely desegregated high school. And I've got some interesting stories about that I'll mention later on as well. But so proximity and area history, that would just be looking at the history of an area, the history of the time where people were buried, and then doing some sleuthing and some detective work to see if you can narrow down where those graves would be. So Cleveland Colored Cemetery has been renamed. You can also use other records. I mean, death dates and death records can be mentioned on so many random things. So sometimes when you're reading someone else's birth certificate or someone else's accident report, you'll see a death place or location or date or year for a parent or a child. Also obituaries, forgot to mention that, but obituaries are oftentimes online, even attached to Find a Grave Index, and you can see the obituaries which will list children, who they're survived by, where they live, which is all good and more information for you to match up with the records that you have. Combing through records, if you're scarce on information, can always be helpful. Another thing would be oral history. So again, for this, because these were all recent deaths and burials, people are still alive who attended some of these funerals. Oral history is a little bit more reliable, but not necessarily. But it's good to check and match up documentation with oral history. Or it can also make people feel less crazy. Like, I swore he was buried. Like, we were talking to DeAndre's father, who said, well, I thought my grandma was buried on a plantation. And looking at the Google Maps, we didn't have time to run to this one. We had lots to find at the other location, so we didn't get a chance to run to here. But I was like, that would make sense, honestly, looking at the Google Maps location for this, because there isn't, quote unquote, an official cemetery area. There is an official cemetery name, but the area is not properly marked, and it's not on Google Maps. But like looking at the geographical location, it looks like, oh, that could definitely be a plantation, because he remembers going to that funeral. Another example of oral history would be diaries and records that were kept by families that have been uploaded onto whatever site you're using. So Family Search, oftentimes you can search records on Family Search, but you can also search books. And there are people who have compiled family histories and then donated or uploaded those onto the site so that other people can connect and find their family history as well. And that was really helpful, for example, in DeAndre's episode, where someone had compiled family history and put it onto a website. It was that Road to Roads I had talked about in the previous episode. And because of that, we were able to locate and connect him to that family line, even though he doesn't have connections in real life to any of those people. I mean, we could reach out to them, and we would love to reach out to them and get to know them and meet them, since they are family, but it is a connection that has been lost over the generations. So it's definitely super helpful. So you can absolutely find those records, those oral histories, those stories that have been passed down, written, sometimes a couple generations apart, sometimes from the person who actually attended those funerals or other ceremonies. They are in journals that have been uploaded already if you don't have access to them from your own ancestors. The 3 grave sites that we narrowed down for our visit when we were going to the Cleveland Historical Museum were Cleveland Memorial Cemetery, which is oftentimes listed as Cleveland Memorial Garden on death certificates, but its official name is just Cleveland Memorial Cemetery, and it was previously the Cleveland Colored Cemetery. The other location would be Nixon Smith Cemetery. That's that one that we are thinking might be on a plantation, and so that's the only one we didn't get to visit. And then Todd Robinson Cemetery, and that is located in Point Blank. If you're not looking at our presentation, all of this is taking place in North Houston. So you've got Houston. If you're shooting out the top north from Houston, just straight onward, you'll eventually hit Huntsville. But if you make a triangle to the right, you will eventually hit Cleveland. Cleveland is much closer to Houston. There is a giant lake called Lake Livingston, which on this journey we found was man-made. And many of DeAndre's family members who have passed had to vacate their homes when this area was going to be dammed and all be completely underwater. And at first it didn't make sense why his family was buried, quote unquote, so close to us, because one of those cemeteries is around the corner from his dad's house in Cleveland, but the other one is about 25 minutes from our home, further up in Point Blank. But that's because they all lived up there, and we ended up running into a lady, and I'll talk again about that a little bit later on, who remembers servicing those family members at the local corner store. And they all had to leave and move down to Cleveland once that whole area was going to be put underwater. But they ended up being buried in Todd Robinson Cemetery out in Point Blank even after they had moved, because that's kind of where the family grave was at that point. People for several generations had already been buried there. And so even though they went and lived and had lives in Cleveland, they were buried many, many cemeteries over, all the way back up to Point Blank near Lake Livingston. This is a refresher if you were watching our last episode with DeAndre. So I have Dee's paternal grandfather covered up because he is still alive. Everyone else here is passed away. And these are the graves for the most part that we were able to find. So last week's episode 4, was on Willie T. Rushing, who is this little boy here. He is Catherine's father. Catherine was influential in DeAndre's childhood and is his paternal grandmother. These 3 generations are mainly buried in those 3 separate graves that I mentioned in the previous slide. So we were hoping to find more information on Green Taylor. This was a roadblock we had come to, and oftentimes these graves have more information on them, either exact dates then that you can match up with censuses or other records, are buried near other people. I should also add that because we went to his grandfather with the specific goals we had, and already with the specific information and the specifics of what we were trying to look for, he was reminded of certain details that he wouldn't have otherwise probably come up with himself. And so he was able to tell us the funeral home name. He remembered that he was buried sometime in the 70s, which we haven't even been able to find a death record for him. And so now that's more information for me to go off of in order to find where he's buried. So we didn't find his grave yet, but because we approached his grandfather with specific goals, his grandfather was then prompted and reminded of other specifics. This is just an overview because it got really confusing once we got on location to the grave sites, because people are generally buried in family groupings, but then you've got the complication of someone wants to be buried near their parents, but they're a wife that's married into another family and their family's plots are a little bit across the way in the graveyard. So it got a little bit confusing, and I do know that there's official records in the genealogy department of these towns now that I've spoken with locals, but it was fun to go and wander around and figure it out also on our own. We have a photo of Eddie, who is DeAndre's paternal grandfather's father. We found his grave. We are looking for more photos of him, and we are in contact now with more of those family members. It was interesting because there was some discussion about the fact that a photo that doesn't seem to represent him very well was chosen for his obituary photo. Because we went to the Cleveland Historical Museum and went through the yearbooks, we actually were able to locate some younger photos of Catherine that specifically my husband's family did not have direct access to. Once my husband's father did see the photo, he did believe he had seen a colorized version of this high school photo I have on this slide, but it was something that my husband had never seen, and it was exciting to find. We also, because we were in the area, did talk to his grandpa and stopped by and hung out for a little bit. I had gotten many photos from his grandfather in the past, but he was able to pull out some more and find some more that I was able to get some good photos of before they fully deteriorated, and one is of Grandma Verby. These two are grouped together because these two had a child together, and these two are grouped together because this is mother and daughter. On this slide, I've got a map of how close these locations were that we're talking about. So this is where we live over here near Sam Houston State University and Huntsville State Park. We've got Sam Houston National Forest. This is this giant area. And if you took this highway all the way down, right about all the way off the page, you would hit Houston. It's like a rectangle with our home and DeAndre's father's hometown being at two corners of a rectangle. We usually take the downwards rectangle to get to Cleveland, but we found that we actually could take the upwards rectangle and we would hit one of these graves. So these are the 3 graves plotted out around Lake Livingston and Cleveland, and then where we live. What was cool about the Cleveland Historical Museum is even we still haven't been able to locate other photos of Willie T, who was again the main focus of DeAndre's episode 4. When we went to the Historical Society, we saw that they had a whole section on the lumber towns that used to thrive in the area, and there were many photos of people who would have been working at the same time at the same places, and who knows, maybe he is in one of these photos yet to be identified. And this is where, again, I highly encourage anyone in the area to go and see if you can identify anyone in these photos. Every single one of these photos has people identified in them that they are able to identify. Otherwise, it just says unknown, 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 and then it'll say like Sam, unknown, unknown, unknown. If you have a historical museum in your area that your family has lived in for a long time, go see if you can identify your own family. I even talked to another woman this week about this, and she said that when she went to Illinois, she was in a historical museum there, and based on the names that she knew from her own family history, some of her pioneer ancestors' things were on display that she didn't even know were on display. But because she went in person to go look at these museums, she was able to see with her own eyes physically those items that once belonged to her direct lineage. At each cemetery that we only went to 2 of the 3, but at both cemeteries that we went to, we did also find many extended family members who had been married into the family, or we saw names that looked very familiar, but we weren't too sure about. So because we knew we could easily come back to these locations, it wasn't like we were on a trip abroad where we needed to just take pictures of anything and everything because we couldn't come back. We just took pictures of what we could keep track of for now. And in coming home and then inputting those into Family Search and into the databases, we realized, holy cow, honestly, every single grave in these graveyards were people in the line. Like they were branches and roots of the line that we were looking at. So next time we go, we'll definitely document the entire cemetery, as it is such a small cemetery. It hasn't been uploaded to these databases yet. Like I mentioned earlier, large cemeteries that have a lot of funding, that have a lot of people visit them frequently, are already pretty well documented online. But because these are such small graveyards, they have not been documented. So that'll be something we can do another weekend. And I'm excited because now I can connect information to so many offshoots of this line. It was exciting to confirm which family groupings were buried together, just because there are divorces and remarriages within many people's lines, and it can get confusing to track down who's buried with whom. We were able to solidify where those groupings were. There were a few graves we were unable to locate that said they were supposedly buried in these graveyards. I'll likely do more digging to just confirm that, because things have been renamed. It's likely that there could have been another colored cemetery, and then that colored cemetery was renamed to something else, and maybe it's not in the specific Cleveland Memorial Garden Cemetery that was previously also a Cleveland colored cemetery. Regardless, there were many unmarked graves because it's a cemetery that didn't have as much money going into it because of family positions and whatnot. There are many graves that have deteriorated. There are graves that are sinking in. It is what it is. Unfortunately, you do have to pay for the upkeep, and if families are unable to do so and a grave deteriorates or a headstone deteriorates because it isn't of quality, it is what it is. So there were many little markers as to where there were graves, but no headstone anymore. And I'll be able to likely go into public record and just locate who those plots belong to, and then confirm whether or not those ancestors we were searching for are buried there or not. It was fun, though, also because DeAndre's father obviously knew his mother was buried right next to his home, but he didn't realize that his grandparents were also buried there. And he's likely been before. He doesn't love going to cemeteries. I understand many people have their comforts or discomforts, I should say, when it comes to death, and it's just really cool. I mean, we love cemeteries. Me and my husband, we love cemeteries, so very much the opposite. He did love the photos we did send, though, and being able to see these for the first time. I cannot explain to you the immense joy that you feel when you finally find the graves, the headstones that you are looking for. We had 2 really cool experiences when we went to these 2 separate cemeteries this past weekend. One was, we had already seen DeAndre's grandmother's headstone. We gave it a little bit of a cleanup. Then we walked over, and we didn't quite know where to start with his great-grandparents. And as we were walking, I noticed several headstones that were flat. They weren't raised standing headstones. They were flat to the ground, were covered with grass. And it wasn't even like light shining from the ground showing me the headstone I needed to wipe down. I just specifically walked up to one, wiped it off with one swift move, and there was his great-grandfather. And so very quickly, instead of hunting the entire cemetery within that grouping, we found everyone we were looking for immediately. I just can't even explain to you that these ancestors want to be found. They want to connect to you. They are aware of you. They are real people that are on the other side cheering for you and watching over you in whatever capacity that you need. And that was just a really cool experience. DeAndre and I turned to each other and we were like, no way, are you joking? And then when we went to the Todd Robinson cemetery, when we went to the other cemetery that was in Point Blank, it was very, very remote. Like we said, you literally, first of all, it's Todd, T-O-D, Robinson Cemetery. And the official markers, like the official highway marker, is T-O-D-D, which is not a big deal, but it's spelled wrong. Come on. And everything online is T-O-D. The official spelling is T-O-D. And so I think that also is a part of why it was hard to kind of locate, because there was discrepancies in just the spelling alone. We turned down this dirt road, and I'm not going to lie, we were a little worried. It is Texas, and people are territorial over their land, which is totally understandable. But we were a little nervous driving down this dirt road because we're like, are we on someone's property right now? Luckily, we weren't. The dogs in the area were all, like, everyone had, it was property. Like, there were chicken coops and stuff, and so lots of dogs were on high alert as we were walking through this cemetery area, but it was a dirt road that led to the cemetery. It was super poorly marked. You absolutely wouldn't be able to see it from the highway. And we parked, got out, and walked along the main path, and the first graves that we looked at were his family's graves, because we usually decide to go on opposite lines and then walk down together on different lines so that we can check more graves quickly. But the first ones we walked up to, DeAndre was like, wait a second, this is them. This is all of them. And so again, it was really cool. We still did clear the entire cemetery just to see, because there were some other extended further down the line names that we were hoping to find. And again, that's when we started to be like, these names all look really familiar, but off the top of my head, I'm not quite sure if they're connected. So yeah, we're definitely going to need to go back and document the entire cemetery, because it's his family and the in-laws and extended family. The congregation that DeAndre and I attend in Huntsville is a really cool amalgamation of people who are either working for the university, so they're transplants to the area, they're longtime residents of the area and have moved to Huntsville, the quote-unquote closest city, in their older age, or they're from the outer areas that are more farm areas, and so they live actually quite further away, but we are the closest congregation to them, or they work for the prison system, because Huntsville, Texas is home to the largest prisons in the state of Texas, and there's really cool, interesting people working for the prison system in our congregation in many different capacities. Anyways, it's a very interesting small town. And we mentioned that we were looking for family history stuff in Point Blank, and this cute little old lady came and talked to us after the meeting, and wow. First of all, I've never engaged with this elderly woman. It's a large congregation, and I work with the youth mostly, but this little lady, we ended up talking for about 45 minutes. She was born and raised in Point Blank in the segregated system. She graduated, went to Sam Houston University with her husband, got her degree in teaching, went back to Point Blank. She was the one that worked in that corner store, and she remembers DeAndre's family members by name and what they look like. She was able to describe them. She was like, yeah, they lived over here. Their house, their like property is underwater now because of when they had to build the dam and create Lake Livingston. Just this like living piece of history in our congregation. And she was like, well, which cemetery did you guys go to? And I was like, I don't know. It's kind of a random one, because I mean, as we were driving through Point Blank, we passed many, many small cemeteries. And she was like, well, which one? And I said, Todd Robinson. And she said, yes, down the dirt road. And then it opens up into a field that is a cemetery. And I was like, oh my gosh, yes. When she taught at the middle school level, she said she was over a club that was like a historical club, and they were sponsored by the Point Blank, which is now part of maybe the Huntsville Historical Society for genealogy. I don't know. Her little club's project at the middle school level was documenting all of the graveyards in the area, in Point Blank specifically. So she was very well versed in the cemeteries of the area. She told me that the information that they published was added onto, and it is now published in the Genealogical Library of Huntsville, and we can go access that and see more details on the plots and the cemeteries themselves and the families in the cemeteries. Just incredible information that I probably would have been able to access one way or another, but was directly given to me by the primary source herself. She gave us some really cool insight into the area at the time when she came back to start teaching. It was in what they called at the time the freedom of choice years, and DeAndre and I had some confusion when we were looking at the fact that desegregation was put into place in 1965, but then the high school itself didn't actually desegregate until 1968. Apparently, and this happens when they create new high schools in areas. Even today, they'll let people who want to finish their senior year or whatever at a certain location do so, but then there's like a forced year where everyone has to do the switch over to wherever they are zoned to go. So there were freedom of choice years where for about 2 years, students could choose to go to the desegregated schools or finish at the school they were at, and then there was the official desegregated years. So she taught throughout those times, and she said she had this incredible mentor that was a Black teacher in the area who took her under her wing and, kind of helped her navigate this time where she's a white woman and she was raised in the white high school and then came back and taught in the desegregated school. And she, had to navigate the way she said things. She had some great stories, but off the top of my head, what is pertinent to this story, she said that Point Blank actually did not have too much issue desegregating because of the resources that it consolidated. Because she remembers like the white bus would come and pick her up, and then the Black bus would come and pick up the Black kids. And so with the consolidation of resources with desegregation, it was really great for a small town like Point Blank, and there really wasn't fight over it, from her memory. It was harder for bigger quote-unquote cities like Huntsville to desegregate just because of the larger population. So that was some really cool insight we were able to get, and now I'm able to grab more information because she is still alive. She is the age of DeAndre's great-grandfather, who is passed. I can gather a bunch of questions and information and kind of go to her like a primary resource. She is quick with it. She is fully there. And so I'm excited to build a little friendship with her. Thank yous for today's episode are going to include FamilySearch.org as always, and all of the rabbit hole free resources that those external links lead us to, like Find a Grave Index and Billion Graves, as well as the Social Security Death Index. And we're very grateful for the Cleveland Historical Society and the Cleveland Historical Museum that they provide as a free resource to anyone who wants to come by. We're also super grateful to have met that cute little lady in our congregation, and we'll continue to use her as a resource. We're just super grateful for the little adventure we were able to have this weekend that has furthered our discovery and helped our own little personal collective to connect. If you are related to this line and want to add more information, email us. Please email us corrections or anything. We would love to read them out in future episodes and feature them on our Throwback Thursday segment, which is completely dedicated to updates from prior episodes. We do have content that comes to you every single day, but Thursdays are literally dedicated to that, okay? So give me the info, correct me. I love it. You're welcome to send that via video or voice note explaining, or you can type it out for me to read. Or, I don't know what that was. All right, going on. Or if you're just on this family line and want to give us a shout out that you learned something or whatever, give us a shout out. Any shock, any disgust, any joy, whatever it is. You're welcome to also send those in. We love it. If you're unrelated, but this podcast still gave you some feelings that you'd like to express, the good, the bad, and the beauty, Like I said, we don't discriminate. Let us know. We love words of affirmation around here. Direct message us across all platforms, but the easiest way to get a hold of us will be through our email, which is connectivecollectivef@gmail.com. That is FH for family history. Connective Collective, FH@gmail.com. And, give us a review if you feel like it. We don't care. We're not looking forward to those at all. We are not sponsored by anyone so far. If you would like to change that, please reach out. And I just want to say we are not sponsored by FamilySearch.org. We literally just want you to understand that you can do this for free. This will remain a free resource that aims to entertain but also inspire anyone to pick up their genealogy journey. We always start with our guests getting connected to FamilySearch.org if they're not already on it. All outside resources are found through messaging others who have added to their ancestors' profile and the rabbit holes that sends us on, or the records on the free websites. If you are ever stuck on Family Search, they have resource centers all over the world that are free for you to access, and we are happy to help you locate one if you feel lost. You will be helped as little or as much as you'd like by a specialist at these centers for free. What I love about these centers, as someone who is a family history veteran, when you access your free, I can't say it enough, free account, if you access your free account from Family Search while physically being in one of these Family Search sites, you get access to all of the awesome but expensive other databases online because of their partnerships with Family Search. While you may have hit a wall in your genealogy while hunting at home, maybe, just maybe, it's only a curtain. If you want to sponsor us, please don't hesitate to reach out. It would be much appreciated. We love you. Crowdsourcing information is what allows this collective to connect. Thank you for being a part of Connective Collective.